Mesdames et messieurs, bonjour et bienvenue au Musée des Beaux-Arts de Montréal. Mon nom est Danielle Roberge et je suis responsable des activités culturelles au service de l'éducation et de l'action culturelle. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Montreal Museum of Fine Arts. My name is Danielle Roberge and I'm Cultural Programming Officer. We are delighted to welcome Mr. François-Marc Gagnon again this year. He is here to present a series of 6 lectures entitled Canadian Art, Exterior Spaces, Interior Spaces. For detail on each lecture, I encourage you to consult the new brochure on cultural activities. As I'm sure you know, Mr. Gagnon needs no real introduction. Emeritus professor at the Université de Montréal, where he taught several generations of students, and presently director of Concordia University's Gail and Stephen A. Jarilowski Institute for Research in Canadian Art. Mr. Gagnon is one of our most passionate art historians. He shares his knowledge and his taste of art with an unsurpassed clarity and energy. Ladies and gentlemen, before welcoming our lecturer, the museum would like to thank the Gail and Stephen A. Jarilowski Institute for their collaboration in this presentation of this conference, as well as René Malo and Marie Gagnon for their financial support to cultural activities. I would like also to extend special greetings to the Concordia University students joining us today for this lecture series. So, with no further ado, I present you Mr. François-Marc Gagnon.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. When they say I don't need presentation, I make like this. One day somebody will present me. No, I mean, in fact, it's very charitable, and I appreciate it. It should be short and sweet. Okay, this time, because I recognize many faces, we will deal with a special topic, let's say, in Canadian art. I thought of even entitled it Outdoor, Indoor, you know, the opposition between the exterior, maybe not just the landscape, but any, I would say, space with outside, like it could be the public space, it could be even in a more narrow sense, let's say, how a community will express itself by, of course, some institution or some way of behaving. And this could be represented, of course, by a painter. So you see, so when I speak of outside, I think of landscape, but I think also of public space, for instance, and even what I would call communal space. And then the inside is the opposite a little bit. It will be the domestic space, for instance, who have been traditionally also associated with privacy. So the private space is also interesting to deal with, how interior of houses and family in the houses and things like that have been represented. And I thought of, to make a good measure, to think even of the mental space, how certain artists have deal with the subject, which is difficult, of course. How do you represent, let's say, memory or imagination as such? Not only use it, but also try to represent how it happens, what happens in your head, you know, how it's represented. And you know that traditionally, we have always compared, let's say, the thought to a kind of a place where you can accumulate souvenirs and image and go to pick them up, a little bit like in a cabinet or a kind of storage, let's say. And you will see some very contemporary artists have took that idea very seriously and have represented the memory as a kind of storage place. So you see the theme that we will deal with. And today I wanted to introduce the theme by a particularly ambivalent type of space. And I thought of the studio, meaning the place where the artist works, the studio of an artist. It's ambivalent because, of course, at first, you can imagine it as a very closed space in which the artist is alone and he works without any witness around, and he's in peace with himself, he's conscious of what he's doing, and he doesn't want to be interrupted by any intrusion from the exterior. On the other hand, if you think of more traditional type of artists, let's say even up to the group of 7, very often what they do, they bring in the studio sketches that were done outside and elaborate from these sketches, let's say, a final painting. So that's why I speak of an ambivalent type of space, because you do have this kind of enclosure, but also you have an intrusion of something from the exterior. And in fact, you will see this will give us more or less the model of all our lectures, because this phenomenon of indoor, outdoor, inner or outer space, if you want, is very common in all, even landscape. You know, you will see very often carry ideological content that could be described like something inside, something not just the representation of what you see, but also some thought, some prise de position, let's say, of the artist. And a nice depiction of that ambivalent space, I think, is this painting by Aurel de Foix, Suzor-Côté. Suzor-Côté is a famous French-Canadian artist. I think we had recently in our museum a wonderful presentation of this artist with a catalogue written by Laurier Lacroix. And he's now a colleague, but he was one of my students, the one I'm very proud of, because he really made a fantastic book this time, and also all these writings are very interesting. So he worked and he published this representation of a heart lover. You see him, he's sitting in a corner. He had difficulty to find a place to sit because this place is a mess. It's full of painting, of sculpture, and even engravings on the floor. And you have this kind of curious type of object, you would say at first, for a studio, like a gun and like a violin or whatever. But because this, of course, if the painter wants to treat, let's say, historical subject, he will need to have a gun to represent war, I don't know. So there is a kind of totally enclosed type of space, in a way. You have no window. You cannot see from outside from there, to outside from there. And the only presence of the outside is the little painting that is all in his hand. As a matter of fact, it's the only spot of clear blue there. And it's exactly that. It's like if, through the painting, something of the exterior enter in the studio space. And I think this kind of model where you have exterior things coming inside of an enclosed area, it reminds me of a system, let's say, that was used in the past a lot, and that we call the camera obscura. Camera obscura means darkened room, and you will see why. This gives you a little bit of principle of the system. What it is, you need a box with closed habitually, with one hole on the left, in which, let's say, the ray of the sun or any brightly seen from the exterior will enter and then will be reflected normally upside down on the little piece of glass that you see on the top of this box. And why we couldn't put it also in the right side, well, let's see, is the artist is on the left side, on the right side completely, and look at it. It is because you can put a mirror inside of the box. What was reversed inside will be reversed another time, and it will be the right. And then you put a transparent paper above this, and you can trace in a very, very realistic fashion what you see. The camera obscura is like a studio. It's something, it gives, by a little hole, the possibility to have an image of the exterior inside, and then the artist can do whatever he wants with it. This camera obscura traditionally was a camera, meaning a real room. It was not only just a box in which the artist could stand, like you see in these two engravings, one from this extraordinary Jesuit, Athanasius Kircher, was a German Jesuit who wrote a fantastic book. It's called Magna Luz et Umbre, Ars Magna Luz et Umbre, the wonderful heart of light and shadow. And instead of converting people to Catholicism, as he should have done, he was doing this research, a little bit ridiculous, on the umbre and lux and things like that. Anyway, Kircher is a kind of weird man. But he explained well the idea of a camera. You see the man standing in the middle, and then there's only two holes by which the exterior enters. You have one here and one there. And the little landscape that should appear here on a kind of a huge piece of glass, but it appears upside down, right? As if what you see outside like this will be suddenly on this pane of glass will be upside down. Of course, like this, it's not very easy to work. Don't worry, this is soon the end of the world. So we have some explosion like this. They will finally put down this church nearby. I don't. Anyway, it's not. But don't worry. So you have to imagine probably again a piece of paper there to be able to trace that, because if you trace it just on the glass, it will not be very useful. In Chapel Hill, in North Carolina University, they have built a camera obscura. So for real, to see how it works. And you have an example of that. I put a little arrow here to point to the little hole there in the wall. I don't know if you can see it from your place, but this is exactly the size of the hole in which you will see the surrounding landscape, let's say, will be like upside down like this. And of course, this whole engraving also shows that the usage of a paper could be very common, because then you have your picture upside down, but it's easy, of course, to put it on the right side, and then to describe in very accurate fashion whatever you see. We think, for instance, that some famous painter like Vermeer was using a camera obscura, and many others, but some of them are quite famous for using that. So I thought it's a good metaphor of the studio, in which you have this kind of closed area, very private in a way, but also open to the exterior. And even if it's by a little hole, let's say, it gives you the possibility of bringing the exterior inside of the studio. Painters have been interested in representing the studio itself, not only the camera obscura. And one of the most famous one is this impressionist painter, Frédéric Bazille, who have represented his own studio there on La Condamine Street, it's a street in Paris. And you notice the date of the painting, 1870, is also the date of his death. And it's him that we see here in the painting, standing, a tall guy, with the palette of a painter. He's near one of his recent paintings, and he's discussing with two friends. We think one is an art critic, was called Astruc, A-S-T-R-U-C. What a name. Anyway, he was called like this. And the other is probably or Manet or Monet. These people were very close together. And why he was, you see, in 1870, he was relatively young, a man of 29 years old. How come he died? Well, he went to a company of Zouaves, of all things, to defend France against the invasion of Germany. 1870 is the date of the famous German war, the German invasion of France in 1870. You remember that maybe from reading from Zola or even Flaubert and other writers of the period. And and unfortunately, he died during this war. He went to defend his country, and he was killed at the time. So he was really a young man who have left maybe not too many paintings, but nevertheless was very promising. He had a fantastic studio, and every time the French author who write about him stressed the fact that he was a Protestant. And a Protestant, of course, is somebody wealthy, as you know. And so the French Protestant is supposed to be wealthy. And in fact, indeed, his parents were a banker in Montpellier, and he had money, he had no problem. That's why he could afford a wonderful studio like this, receiving people, having a guy on the piano, you know, in the background. Monsieur Maître, Lucien Maître is there. And probably the two guys are discussing here are Renoir and Monet. So all this is he wants now to show an aspect of the studio is interesting also that I not mentioned. This is the place where you meet people also, where you meet amateur, you meet art critic, and you meet eventually a buyer. This is another aspect of the studio where the exterior come and it was important. So Basile is a good example. And the painting on the wall, some of them are known. I show you, for instance, this one is probably the one I show you on the right there, a kind of orientalist type of painting in which a lady, of course white, get dressed by a black one. Anyway, all this type of very à la mode type of painting at the time. On the other wall, on the other side, you have a study that was quite typical of the Impressionists. You see, try to treat the nude, but in the outside, not in the studio, precisely. The nude who have been, of course, always associated with the studio, with a kind of enclosed area, now is put outside by a kind of fisherman with a net, you know. And so these two paintings are his own. The big one there is from Renoir. So Basile was not only relatively wealthy, he could also collect painting of his colleague. So he showed all these aspects in one painting. As I say, he make even a kind of speciality of this representation of studio. Like here is a more humble one on Rue Visconti, where you share with other people also, and where immediately what is striking, you don't have the big window that you have in the previous one. All is closed. The only opening are done by the painting that are there on the wall. And in the foreground, what you see is the chevalet, comment on dit ça? The easel of the painter with a painting here that you see only from the side. So you don't know exactly what he's painting, and then his palette on the floor. So he's really nearby doing this painting. He shows you that he's almost inside of the painting. So you do have this type of representation of studio, I says in many. You have also the same type of effort with Canadian painter. I thought, for instance, Adrien Hébert, who represent a studio on Labelle Street here in Montreal, and who have certainly seen the Basile studio that I showed you before, you know, because you have even the stairs and his own painting on the wall, and even here on the painting, what you see the same armchair that's there, as if you have, he's representing a painting in which he's making the painting, he's representing a kind of, in French we say mise en abîme, like you go from one painting to the other endlessly like this on the easel there. So it's the same idea. The painting which there is known. I show it to you in parallel. It's Hébert have made a kind of, was very interested, let's say, in representing the modern city, and with all his, I would say, industrial aspect and all his economic aspect also. So he represents an elevator in the port of Montreal, in which there's a lot of grain coming and going and all this, really like a symbol of this new life of the city. It's interesting that Adrien Hébert does this type of representation at the moment when art becomes more abstract. These are the two solutions. Or you represent the city in a realist way, like he does, or you go toward something completely abstract who have nothing to do with realism. And it's about the same, the two phenomena are parallel. And maybe because of that, Adrien Hébert was seen less in the avant-garde, let's say, than the others like Pellan or Borduas or all this. That you could imagine that continuing this type of painting, even if he was, in his discourse, very modern and very open to modern life and wanting to show, say, all these aspects of the modern era, even then, because he stick to his more realistic approach, he was put aside a little bit during the 40s and the 50s. Why the painting is still on the walls? It was because it was bought much after the painting was done. In 1962, the Gallery of Hamilton bought it, and so it was in his studio when he made the painting. So there's no problem with that. Okay, this is a first, I would say, a first way to deal with a studio, like an object that you can represent and that you can reflect about. But what I will be more interested to do, it is to explore a little bit what the studio specifically give the possibility, which kind of possibility the studio give to the painter. Meaning not so much to represent the studio, but to ask yourself what the studio permit to the painter to do. What is the most interesting thing that he can do there? And one of these things is certainly the self-portrait. Because in a studio, the painter can look at himself and reflect about his own face and his own look, if you want, without being bothered by anybody. So it's a kind of exterior, interior. You have to see him maybe in a mirror or in a photograph or whatever he thought. But it's also a kind of exploration of the self. And this, so don't we quit, if you want, the idea of just representing the studio, but trying to think what the studio make possible. Okay, so I have a fantastic example of that. It is this painting by Alex Colville that's called Studio. It is a depiction of him as he is now. I recognize right away what we call, anybody who have a cardiologic operation knows that what we call zipper. It is this, you are open like a chicken and they operate your heart and then they close you and what is left. So Colville had exactly this operation, so he wanted to stress that. He's nice not to show his sex. But Colville is proper always. He will not do anything like that. But he's standing there, and this is his studio. We know by other picture that it's exactly the neatest of man. I never saw a studio as neat as Colville's studio. It's incredible. You don't see anything, a tube of paints and things like that. Everything is well kept and drawers and things. He's perfectly, a little bit like the image he gave there also. And then so I said, this is really definitively one of the things that the studio make possible, this kind of inner type of research on himself. This is subject matter that is not common to represent a naked whole man. We represent a lot of naked lady, but relatively young, but a naked whole man is not a very common subject. So I tried to think in the tradition when you found that, okay, you could have like an example like here with Rubens, the death of Seneca. You know, Seneca was a famous philosopher. He had the misfortune of teaching Nero. That is never a good idea, so to teach a guy like Nero. And Nero suddenly, completely crazy, suspected him to be in a plot against his life and ordered him to commit suicide. And that's what you are, what is depicted here. So you see on the right, the doctor who cut one of his veins. He's standing in a hot water to augment the process, let's say. And on the other side, you see a young student who is taking his last words, you know, in no, this is very sweet, but I don't know what I will say in that position. Probably shit or something, I don't know. But anyway, le mot de la fin, hein, c'est, alors, Seneca. And then in the back, you have two two soldiers that see that everything will be proper. But if you think of the Colville piece, in fact, it's very different because this is not a self-portrait. It's just a portrait of an old man. And it's not at all referring to the studio because it's referring rather to history, to a piece of history of the past. Seneca was a philosopher of the Stoician persuasion. And to go back to the propos of Colville, I think it's interesting to confront this painting with this preparatory drawing that you see on the right. Maybe it's not too clear, but what we see is his leg, and then on the top, kind of the trees. And indeed, they are in the painting also, this outdoor. In the top of the painting, you see a little bit of tree appearing there. And in the drawing, they are very eminent. You have on the top of it two dates, which, well, okay, that's interesting. He can give you the date when he did that. But more interesting, I think, is what he noticed, mirror image. Meaning not only that the whole image of the personage is done probably through facing a mirror, but also that you see that you have an arrow here between, as if these trees are a mirrored image of his legs also, as if he wants us to integrate this exterior aspect with the interior aspect, with the trees, with the legs, that they will have a kind of homology between both. And in the drawing, it's interesting because it's very explicit. You make an arrow and you write mirror image, and you cannot miss it. The other case I would like to deal with more extensively, because I think it's very pedagogical in a way, is the case of Riopelle. You know Jean-Paul Riopelle is a famous Canadian painter. Sometimes you have the impression when you are outside of the country, he's the only painter that is known. When you say, well, I met Jean Dubuffet once, and I says, he says, what do you teach? I says, Canadian art. Ah, l'art des trappeurs, he says. Trappers art. He said, Dubuffet, pas exactement, not exactly. And Riopelle was very often called that way in France. Un trappeur supérieur. Ça, it's Breton who invented that. And so as if what come from Canada must be like trappeur, but it's the only one that they know. When you speak of Canadian art in France, Riopelle, oui, c'est très intéressant. And then as if there's nothing else. But anyway. So I wanted to deal with Riopelle because he had he went through two types of studio completely different when he was young. And one, I think, was a kind of perversion of the idea of a studio. It was the worst thing that can happen to a young painter, you know, the type of education they receive first. He never say that himself. He always praised his first master that he had, but I think I'm right. I think I try to demonstrate why it was not good. And on the other hand, after meeting Bourdieu and getting involved with the automatist group, Riopelle suddenly find another type of studio, very different, in which he could really find his own personality. So I will try to show the two things. Okay, the first studio that Riopelle, as a kid, in a way, was exposed to was, in fact, the private house of Monsieur Henri Bisson, of which he speaks always with a lot of respect and a lot of enthusiasm. The problem is that we don't know who is Henri Bisson. And this is perfect for Riopelle because what influence he had on him, it's very difficult to establish and all that. More than that, he had created a kind of myth around the age he had when he was at Bisson's studio. And you do find in the literature a lot of hypotheses, to my mind. So for instance, he was not even 6 that he was with Bisson. Well, this is really young. He says, I was not even 10, he says himself. And then others says, well, why not? He was 8 years old, something in between, so not too bad. But in fact, I have a fantastic student, it's called Caroline Hort, who met the daughter of Bisson, and she established exactly what happened. Bisson was a teacher at the kind of primary school in the region where Riopelle was living. And it was called l'École Saint-Louis de Gonzague. Of course, all the schools in Quebec are Saint-Louis, Saint-Cy, Saint-Ça, okay. Saint-Louis de Gonzague. Anyway, so in the east part of Montreal, near the Delormier Street, and in that region where he lived. And we know when Bisson started to teach there, and we know also when Riopelle became a pupil there. And if you take these two dates in consideration, Riopelle probably have started to follow the lecture of Bisson in 1936, and meaning when he was 13 years old. So he's not really a little child with Bisson. He was, let's say, a teenager. This is, it's one of the dull pleasure, I guess, of art historian to discuss dates and to find facts and things like that. We love this. Maybe it's boring, I don't know, but in fact, it's a thing that we indulge in. And then you ask him to Riopelle, what you were doing with Bisson? What was happening in his studio? So he says, we made terrible painting. We made very academic type of painting. And you have to know that in the vocabulary of people of that period, in Canada and in Quebec especially, when you say academic, it means bad. It means kind of dully realistic type of painting, very close to nature and without any imagination, any creation. Worse than that, he says we were copying reproduction, meaning that they were not dealing really with the exterior, they were dealing with the image of the exterior that he judged was conform enough to reality to be a model. And so we have acquired here recently at this museum, I hope they don't show them too much, but we have them in the warehouse downstairs, some of these early paintings who are in fact very bad. This is the typical Christmas card type of things you see that you receive every year, especially when you're dealing with art. People want to please you. They send you a picture like that. Oh my God. But anyway, well, this is typical of what he was doing with Bisson. And it's a copy of an image. It's not really, he didn't went outside to see a little chalet like this and with a beautiful landscape like this. There's no such a thing. He copied an image, probably a calendar or whatever. And they decided that this was realistic enough, both of them, Bisson and him, that it should be the model that the painter should follow. And I will quote you some of his idea. Some of them I've done with, I translate myself, and others, it's from interview with a Toronto journalist, so it is in English. He said, for a long time, I did hyper-academic painting. We were copying images in a catalog. You see exactly. When we felt on impressionist painting, we dismissed them rapidly. I found them awful. So already, impressionist painting was judged as being too far from reality. A painting by Renoir or by Cézanne and all this was bad. This was bad art. This is good, you see, because then you see exactly how it is. He repeated the same thing with the Toronto journalist. I was, what he said, I was a Sunday painter for 10 years. Well, you will always be careful with dates and things like that. It's not 10 years, it's 3 years. But anyway, and I made such bad painting, so academic. In winter, when we worked on reproduction, if we came across an impressionist painting in a book, my teacher will mumble hurriedly, that's bad, and we'll turn the page. Okay, so you repeat this thing. Why was this painting was so terrible? So I tried to make a little mind experience. You put together two paintings by two famous painters, one by Renoir and the other by Cézanne, of the same subject matter. If you look carefully at the Cézanne, you will see that the hill we see here is in fact here. Renoir did a little bit more, but they were in front of the same subject matter. But there's no way you can confound a Renoir with a Cézanne. They are completely different style. So what happened there, they are reproducing the same thing, but there is an element of subjectivity that intervened there that was forbidden in the Bisson atelier. What Bisson wanted to do, it is an image so close to the model that you could not recognize who did it. That if it's done by the teacher or by the student, it's exactly the same. And Riopelle said that. He says, at the end, our painting were look alike so much that we could not say who did what. And so that's why I thought, I said, which kind of studio is this? It seems it's not open. It's open to the exterior, but in such a way that it destroys also any possibility of subjectivity, any possibility of being yourself. Having, for instance, even in front of the same subject matter, two different attitudes, two different reactions. One will be typical of Renoir, more fuzzy, more joyful, full of life and all that, and one more rigid, more structural, let's say, of Cézanne. Because they are not the same, and they put this input, let's say, of their own subjectivity in a painting. In fact, what was Bisson was trying to achieve, it was what we try to achieve in reality in science. When two laboratories says, laboratory X and Y says, we have the same result, that means that you touch truth, you are okay. If one make an experience and another make the same experience to check you, and it says, yes, you were right, we did it also, and we agree. So this is what in science we will expect, but not in art. And I think this was the big mistake of Bisson, of trying to reduce all aspects of originality, all subjectivity, and to finish by a kind of very, what he called hyper-academic, very dry type of painting. I give you a few other examples of Riopelle, but I would say at the end of his stay with Bisson. This one in French is called Hibou Premier. I try to translate I think whole first, because it makes an allusion to the fact that in the 70s, Riopelle made a whole series on all. And so this is the Hibou Premier, the first one, let's say, of the series. Bisson was a hunter, and he had in his studio this kind of stuffed animal like this. See? And this, again, it's not something that, I don't know if you can eat this thing whole. It must not be very palatable. I have no idea. I never tasted. But certainly in scientific collection, it will make sense, see, to have a little bird like this, or even a collection of them. I remember in my childhood, we used to go to the Deaf and Mute Institution on St. Lawrence Street. I don't know, maybe it's on allait chez les sourds-muets, like we used to say. And there was a Father Crête who have a little studio, a little museum, let's say, with a lot of stuffed animals and a lot of things like that. And so we used to enjoy that. This was like before the Biodome, long time before, but anyway. So again, this kind of, what I call this kind of scientific trend in the teaching of Bisson could be stressed there. Look at this other quotation that I translated from an interview with Charles Bouilleur. So this is in France. He says, every day I used to go to an old Beaux-Arts painter. I was not even 10 years old. Each one of us were painting in his corner, and we worked like that, isolated from one to the other. No words were said. From time to time, my teacher came to see what I was doing. After a few months, all my works were absolutely similar to his own. It was academic, very academic, nude landscape, still life. Everything is false, of course, in this, except this idea that what we intended to do is to make painting absolutely alike one to the other. Meaning that Bisson or Riopelle and all that, you cannot recognize them. I said the rest is false. He was not 10 years old. He was not with an old Beaux-Arts teacher. It's not true. Bisson was a professor in a primary school. So anyway, this, I think, I have a colleague, Louise Vigneault, who says, who compared Riopelle to a trickster. I think it's a very good idea. You know what the trickster is in Amerindian mythology? See, God created the world all well, and then a trickster come and change things, make it more difficult. For instance, God have created river who went in both ways. So you could hop the river and then go back from the other side by the other direction. Trickster came and made the river going only one direction. So you have to row and to row when you go against the river. So Riopelle have the mind of this, especially with art historian. He tried to challenge us. He gave us false information, anyway, it's a very difficult painter to work with in that sense. Never speak of art. For instance, I met him a few times. We spoke of boxing, of sports, of whatever subject matter, except painting, of course. And you are like this, you really finish with this boxing. I couldn't care less. But that's it. It's the only thing that he will speak. And and also some paradox and things like that. Okay, I show you another example of these early works. A still life with a violin. Okay, it seems at first very classical type of painting in which you have a violin, a kind of head from the antique. This instrument that makes, we call it a metronome. Is it the word you use? Yeah, okay. And then a book here. And be careful, I thought first this is another book, but this is the reflection of that book on the table. It was well varnished, and this is a kind of very peculiar type of things in which I think we must make a reflection also. The type of painting there is very traditional in that sense that habitually it's a way to show the arts, for instance, music and sculpture, and also very often to suggest that the vanity of the heart also, that this will pass in a way. It's all already disorganized, and we don't know what will be left. The model of that, of course, are these wonderful Dutch painting of the 17th century, like Peter the Ring. Just one example, in which you see again, music, a violin and a flute and a partition here. And then instead of the head from the antique, you have a page of drawings in which you see a child using a pipe to make bubbles. And this is, of course, very typical of this type of painting because as bubbles can vanish in the air very rapidly, all the beauty of the world also can disappear. So this kind of vanitas type of thinking. Tout est vanité. Everything is vanity. Everything will pass. And so they have also allusion to, let's say here with a kind of nautilus, a kind of shell that is there, a hourglass here, and then finally this globe where you see America and Mexico in great, very clearly, means also an allusion to science, if you want, or to geography, or to the discovery of the world. And with the same idea also, all this will pass, all this will disappear. The thing, if you go back to the Riopelle, the difference between both, it is here you have the feeling of a kind of accumulation of objects without too much idea behind. In the Peter the Ring, it's full of symbolism, it's full of allusion and things like that. It's a very complex type of painting. I just brush it very superficially about it. But when you go back to the Riopelle, it says it's poor. What is the relation between a book instead and a violin and this thing here was very ugly? And why to put that like, it's like deconstructed, if you want. It's not really integrated. And one of the things that this attempt to realism that Riopelle will certainly comment, it is this idea of trying to make even the reflection of things, for instance, here in the table. So I tried to make an enlargement here with my little arrow to show you where it is exactly. I thought it was two books, one above the other. But no, there's one book, and there is this reflection. And Riopelle tells the story of how this attempt to represent even the reflection of things like this was the eve of a kind of catastrophe for him. I will read again one of his texts. He says, "We were then painting side by side," always describing how he went with Bisson. "We were painting on the motif or from reproduction. One day, we were confronted with a dilemma. We wanted to copy as best as we could a still life, but when we were tracing in the canvas the reflection of a bottle on the table, we were not able to make it real," he says. "The blue of a label of a bottle, for example, when reflected on the table, looks unreal. Only a trained eye could see it. Then for me, this was a catastrophe," he says, "because to put the real on the canvas was to be untrue to nature, since people could not recognize it. I asked myself, how could I continue to paint, since for me, to paint was simply to reproduce what I saw." So suddenly you have things, then even if you are very realistic, that in fact will create an ambiguity for another perceiver than you, and will mean that even I want to be as faithful as possible to reality, but I make something unclear. And he says, you go a little bit further, he says something false, that people cannot recognize, that cannot see like I see them. And he says, for me, that was catastrophe, because how can I reproduce nature as well as I can and not succeed to make it clear to everybody? And should I stop to look, for instance, this idea of reflection, how it was done, again, in with Dutch painting. See? What he's alluded to seems to be a little bit like this. You see this glass here, and on the tablecloth, you see a little bit of reflection of the glass. And also in this cafetière, here you have a reflection of the whole room. If I just on light make it a little bit detailed, you see, again, the same glass that I was showing you, and then with the reflection on the table. This is what he mentioned. But here what is interesting, it is the reflection is a window, in fact. You see the frame of a window. You see them also in the glass. And you see not only these windows here, but you see even the hand of the painter, and the painter is reflected in his own painting. Suddenly you understand that this painting, this complex painting with a lot of food and things, are in fact also, due to this reflection, a way to show you in which space it was done. You see where the light comes from. Then suddenly all that becomes to make sense. You are in a universe which is very rich, very wealthy, very Dutch, of course, and with all these goodies that they like, oysters and whatever. But you have also the presence of the room. And the reflection in the painting of Riopelle have no meaning like that. It's just a reflection. It's just, there's a book, it was read, and it happens to be on a varnish table, and you see a little bit of reflection of it. Again, the lack of connection, the lack of meaning, the lack of sense that you have in famous Dutch painting is obvious in this type of approach that Bisson was suggesting. Then I asked myself, I says, was it better for Riopelle, let's say, to go out, to get out of the studio and to be in front of nature instead? And we have two photographs of him about this age that were taken showing him at work in the outdoor. The one on the left, you see, is in a beautiful landscape, and he's looking at the landscape, and the other is painting, he's looking at his painting. And indeed, this is the dilemma when you work outside. When you look at the motif, you don't see your painting. When you see your painting, you don't see the motif. And it's a constant going and coming back to the outdoor and to your painting that make the challenge of this outdoor painting. And we know, for instance, that one of these paintings, that the painting that is painting here is this one. If you compare, you will see that the mountain who are here, you see there this white shape, it corresponds to the spire of the church there, and he's working on the bottom part here. So that means what we see behind him, it's not what the subject matter of his painting. The subject matter is in front of him somewhere else. So this is well documented. So we know where he did the two paintings. But again, like I told you, the dilemma is not is not solved completely by going outside, because again, you are confronted between this absolute realism on one side and the other side, this impossibility to control it. I wanted to clarify that by showing you a painter that I don't like particularly, but who is very, very popular. You know Norman Rockwell, of course. He was on the, I don't know which magazine every Saturday. And so he made a self-portrait of himself. And he called it triple self-portrait, because this is him looking at a mirror where he sees himself and then painting himself on the canvas. In fact, okay, so it's a 1, 2, 3 portrait, if you want. And yeah, a little bit ambitious. He put Durer here and Van Gogh and Picasso and everything, but as model. And then Riopelle would say he cheats, because you see that to look at himself so close, he needs glasses. And of course, in his painting, he doesn't put glasses. Then the pipe is going down here, the pipe is going up there. So it's a little bit arrangé. After all, he can do whatever he wants. But you see, in the self-portrait, you have this type of dilemma also. You have to look at yourself, and even a guy like Rockwell, who pretend to be very realistic and very close to make you think now that he takes some freedom with reality. So even in that circumstances, you have this ambiguity. Okay, this is the first education that Riopelle received, that I tried to illustrate like that. An education in which exteriority was stressed and interiority was negated, in a way, in which the outdoor was everything and the indoor was completely extinguished. What happened when he changed completely of type of studio when he met Borduas? How did he met Borduas? You know that Riopelle was tempted for a while to be an architect, and he went to Polytechnic school here at Université de Montréal, and I'm sorry, I'll just sit a little bit. I have a bad leg, so if you don't want me to fall on the ground after one of the explosions, I better sit. And so he wanted to be an architect, and he went to this Polytechnic school, and it didn't work a lot. We made some research, and when I was professor at the Université de Montréal, I said, oh, this is my chance. I would see in the file of Riopelle in the Polytechnic which kind of marks he got and things like that. But they were careful not to give total access to that. So we know that he went for a year, and after another few months, he quit the studies, and he went instead to the École du Meuble, the furniture school, where Borduas was teaching. And that's the way they met, of course, during its class. And very curiously, Riopelle didn't speak much of his attitude with Borduas. He speaks only of Bisson all the time. Okay? When you ask him what was your first master and all that, he didn't mention much Borduas. But fortunately, Borduas mentioned him. So we know a little bit which kind of student he was by Borduas in a kind of little pamphlet that he published just after the Revue Globale. You know that Borduas published a manifesto in 1948, and because of that, he was thrown out of the school, of this École du Meuble, and he wanted to defend himself, to make a kind of apologia pro domo sua. And he called it Projection Libérante, a little booklet that was published, and in which he speaks of each of his students without naming them directly, but one we are sure it's Riopelle. He speaks of kind of things that he used to do in class. He says, I used to bring album of famous painter, like for instance Matisse, and especially drawing of Matisse. And he says, I wanted to convince the student of the interest of this type of drawings and how beautiful it was. And this one is called Theme and Variation, because Matisse made a series of drawing with the same model and very close to this one. But I just need one to show you what happened. And then he described the reaction, he says, of one of his students who had an academic education to which he clung, and this is Riopelle, of course, this type of education he got from Bissot. And his reaction was to say that these drawings were not beautiful, that they were incomplete, and that this particular one, I mean in that style, flat, were flat and without relief. Together, we studied one of them, says Bordua, minutely, trait after trait, taking note of imperceptible changes in thickness or intensity, and noticing the impeccable order of relationship in space. Indeed, if you follow the line of a Matisse drawing, you will see that it's not dry. It's in contrary, they have certain thickness sometimes, certain small, thin, and it makes a kind of flow, and even it suggests volume, in fact, contrary to what Riopelle thought. And at last, once he gasped. That is incredible, Monsieur Bordua. This is the first time that I have seen volume in these drawings. And so Riopelle is not named there. But we know Riopelle in another interview said, imagine, he says, when I was young, I could not even see the volume in a Matisse drawing. So when I saw that, I said, oh, this is him. And then he says Bordua tell another story. He said, the same student, another time, was very mad at me because he says, I classified the drawing in my class according to the spontaneity and the, let's say, the real originality of each one. And poor Riopelle was at the end of the class with things so dry and so perfect and all that. Yeah, Bordua says, well, this is not very interesting. You have a D minor instead of, I don't know what. Anyway, he gave him a bad marks with this. And Riopelle was shocked, of course. And he says, I have to justify my note, my marks to him. He says, so I try to explain him that your painting is without character, you don't have any originality, and all this, of course, Riopelle doesn't go too well. He's not touched by that. And he said, and Bordua says at the end, and suddenly I noticed that his figure, because it was a drawing of a personage, let's say, that at the end I saw that what he wanted, this figure, wanted to have an abdomen, let's say, will be concave, and because the shading was not done properly, it looks in convexity in the contrary. And I said that to him. And for him, this was catastrophe. It was very important. He discovered, again, it's the same type of phenomenon. That means you aren't close to reality, but the reality tricks you. Do you remember this drawing in which you see, if you look, it looks like a rabbit, and if you look at the other direction, it looks like a duck. You have seen that. I should have the picture, but everybody has seen that. So this is realistic. This is what you see, but the interpretation it can go both ways. And convexity and concavity, of course, is a good case of that. In certain drawings of Riopelle seems to be influenced a little bit by what Matisse did and what Bordua tried to explain him. But look at this one, in which I think the problem of convexity and convexity is a little bit there. He tried, it's a cat head, of course, and he tried to create here a kind of convexity. He said that we will go a little bit under the skin there, but if you follow the etchings, you will see there's two hypotheses there. Some are good and some are not good, and as if you have an hesitation on that. It's a fact that any let's say, pattern like this, because the light that we are used to come from above, when spheres have light on the top, we see them as kind of rounded ball, if you want. But if you have shadow at this place instead, we see it like a hole, like something more in depth. And what I did, I took exactly the same picture and I put it upside down here, and then you have the same picture become suddenly all little concavity, let's say, and only one with in relief in the middle. Same thing, let's say, with a photograph. You can do that also. You reverse a photograph, it's the same photograph. Here it looks like if it's a kind of volcano, and the other like a tumulus. And just by putting it upside down, you have this thing. So this is a good example of this ambiguity of even a very realistic picture. And for Riopel, this is the problem, what he called the catastrophe. When there's no way, even if you are perfect, like in a photograph, that you could decide which is good, which one is real. And that because of that, he said, we make falsity, people cannot really know what we want. Of course, the master of this type of drawing is Escher. He called this one concave and convex, and you become mad just to try to understand what's happening there. It's a very, very complicated type of. Sometimes you see the stairs like going up, and then sometimes you see them like if you are under the stair and in that direction. No? Am I the only one to see that? No? Okay. And everything is like that. These seem to be in relief, and suddenly they are the opposite. You have little personages who create also ambiguity in that. Anyway, Escher is a master of this type of convexity, concavity problem. But in the class of Borduas, this was very important. The other factor also seems to have played, there was during the war in 1944 in a museum an exhibition of Dutch master. Why? Because of course of the war, many great museums of Europe sent their masterpiece in America, and they were traveling show everywhere. So we had suddenly the possibility of seeing a full room of Van Gogh. And Riopel, with the habitual exaggeration, says, I went there 50 times. With another journalist, I went there 80 times. Well, okay, why not 100? Anyway, but then you could see maybe a little bit of the effect of this contact with Borduas and with Van Gogh, let's say, on the painting that he made in 44, like this little church. It's a little freer than what we saw before, but not much yet. What will be finally important, but again, Riopel will try to create a kind of ambiguity on that. He will insist that the only influence that he had was from a contact with Ozias Le Duc. What happened? He spent a winter with Borduas family in Saint-Hilaire in 1945. And of course, Borduas, who have been the student of Ozias Le Duc, presented the old man to Riopel. But in an interview that should have been put in the garbage, but anyway, in an interview with Robert Scully, I don't know if you know what is Robert Scully, very proper gentleman, always dressed to kill and all that. And he asked him, what was the main influence in your career? And he says, and then Riopel with a glass of wine and with evidently people around laughing at his repartee and all that, he says, Borduas and me were students of Ozias Le Duc. Whoa, so this is first is false, and secondly, it's terrible because he put himself on the same level than Borduas. Both of us were students of Ozias Le Duc. Here you have a photo of the old man done by l'Abbé Tessier or one of his friends, and he's with a little spatula and with his palette, and he smiled and all that. And what I show in the right place is the studio, the studio of Ozias Le Duc in Saint-Hilaire. Unfortunately, this building doesn't exist anymore. It was burned by a stupid a party who turned badly by one of his, comment est-ce qu'on dit, petit-neveu, one of his not nephew, but great nephew, yeah. And they were smoking pot, I don't know, anyway. And suddenly the whole thing burned, and unfortunately nothing is left that. When Riopel speaks of his contact with Ozias Le Duc, that's what he says. He says, the most important influence on my heart was certainly the influence of Ozias Le Duc. When I contacted him, he was an old man living in a shack, but I will not call his studio a shack, you know, I would call it, in the contrary, it was very, I went there, I know how it was very beautiful and very interesting, in fact, to visit. He says, and he had the reputation to be a completely crazy painter. No. Ozias Le Duc was called le vieil homme, le vieux sage de Saint-Hilaire, the whole wise man of Saint-Hilaire, but certainly not un vieux fou. like Riopelle says here. Well, okay, so anyway, I'm used to it. He could, and then he described, but he says he was a great painter. And then he described his technique. Listen to that. When he painted, he could spend 3 or 4 years on one painting. He followed, well, for instance, when he painted a tree, he followed it scrupulously through the seasons. In the spring, he added buds on its branches. In the autumn, he made the leaves fall. In the winter, he added snow. And with time, this became a very thick crust. He says this painting is done by 3 or 4 years. And at the end, in 20 minutes, he finished it, and it was a masterpiece. This is certainly false. The paradox it is that the only drawings that Riopelle had in his collection, and coming from Ozias le Duc, a drawing that probably Ozias gave him, is exactly the opposite, since it's Ozias trying to fix in one drawing some things that appear in an instant. That means suddenly the clouds form the face of an old man. It's exactly the opposite of this kind of painting that took a lot of time. And I suspect that Riopelle have transformed a story that you could read in Nadja of André Breton. I don't know if you know Nadja. Nadja is a wonderful book in which Breton explains his relationship with this mysterious woman who for instance, says, André, look there at this window. The light will suddenly go on. And he looks and poof, the light go on. I don't know if she knew it, but probably she knew the habit of these people. Anyway, so a kind of mysterious type of thing. And in Nadja, Breton tells about a Sunday painter who was painting in Marseille, in the south of France. And he had this little easel there, and he was painting the landscape toward the end of the day. And he says, I look at him, and it was fantastic because he was accompanying the shading, the growing shading of the fact that the sun is going down. So in the beginning, it became to, what was clear and beautiful became to be more dark. And then the sun itself was really repainted all the time to be put them finally at the horizon and finally behind the horizon. And he says at the end he had few spots of red that were put black. And he says when he finished his painting, it was all black because, of course, he accompanied the phenomenon from the passage from the day to the night. So I suspect that Riopelle have read that and have adapted to his great master, Ozias le Duc. Okay. But the real important fact for the second studio of Riopelle was not with Ozias le Duc, nor even with Bordeaux, I mean personally. It was, in fact, in this type of shed here that we'll show you. What we know, it is that with time, Riopelle painting became a little bit freer than before, and his parents were very deceived about this. They didn't like it. His mother destroyed a few of his too Van Goghish type of painting and says, for God's sake, Jean-Paul, continue to paint as good as you were before. You know, why you go to this? So then he decided not to paint anymore at home. And he of course, he begins to frequent, of course, the student of Bordeaux at l'École du Meuble. Among them, there was Marcel Barbeau. And Barbeau's parents were living on Saint-Hubert Street, and they have a little shop there, kind of épicerie. And like in many houses of the time, they had in the back like this type of shed. And of course, this is not the one. I must tell you the truth. I went with my wife, who's a fantastic photographer. It's her who took the picture. And I said, Nina, anything will do, any of this shed. She said, this one is funny because it's written stop, and you have the two black spots and all that. And you see the little stair goes up. You have one little window. You have a door open on the void and all that. I thought, okay, this is good. But in fact, we know the exact address of it. And if one of you is a good photographer and could go a little bit further than we went, you know, maybe it still exists. It still exists. So what it was a shed like this. And they used to gather there Barbeau, Mousseau, and Riopelle and Morissette, a few of the students of Borua, and make experiment there of automatist painting. What they were told a little bit of what the surrealists were doing, and they were freeing themselves from the exterior world and all that. So they were suddenly in a very closed type of space, and in which, on the contrary to Bisson, interiority, subjectivity was the only thing. There, you don't have anything to represent. You just have to create a kind of outpouring, let's say, of energy on a canvas. But finally, it's you and you only. You see the opposition of. I said the first studio that he was exposed to was a studio was a bad studio, in fact, in which you destroy all the personality. This one was exactly the opposite. And when Riopelle really went down in himself, it was suddenly very dark. And this is an example of this painting done in this little shed. It's now at the National, I think it's now at the National Gallery. It was bought by Champlain Charret, who was a good friend of Riopelle. And it's done with painting, with Sherwood William paint. It's not done at all with real artist material. That's why many of those paintings have been destroyed or disappeared. So one of them have been saved like this. He called it Ontario because he made a little trip there and back, and have nothing to do with Ontario, of course. And you see suddenly the old nature, the old contact of nature we had before, it disappeared completely. You are almost, in fact, in front of a black hole. It's the camera obscura, who is completely obscura, in which even the little hole is bouché. At the end of the lecture, you will see you will learn more French, which is one of the reflection of my fatigue, and again a little side effect of this lecture. Okay. With time, he will add more material to this painting, and like this one, very often without title. It's just called painting, with a lot of impastos and these lines, so dripping and all that. And will, in fact, reconstruct the wall. Among these first experiences, one, to my mind, was the more interesting, is a series of decalcomania that he made. I'll show you one example. A decalcomania, as you know, it's a system in which you put on a sheet of paper spot of color, let's say relatively fluid, and then you take your sheet like this and you press it on another sheet of paper. And when you lift it, you have the surprise to see a kind of reproduction of what you did, but with a lot of transformation. You see, for instance, in the left side, probably the kind of arch that is here is done like this, by really folding the paper like this and then pressing them together, and you get arch on both sides. You understand how it works? The important things to understand with decalcomania, it is that you have a surprise when you are in front of the finished painting. You cannot really control what will happen. So I will say, when he removed the things, he suddenly become very conscious of what was in a painting. If you want, instead of being just completely absorbed by the exterior spectacle, now, in the contrary, you are absorbed by what will happen. And if you think of it, the spatula that Riopelle will use after for his more, I would say, classic type of painting, does exactly the same thing on a small scale. A spatula, you know what it is? It's a kind of painter knife, in which you can put the color on the spatula or on the canvas. And when you press on it, of course, you don't see what is outside. And when you remove it like this, then you discover what it is. A little bit like in the decalcomania. That means also that each stroke of the spatula makes the painter conscious of what he's doing. And in Riopelle, this is beautifully expressed when he says, this is total hazard, but it's also total control. And then because of that, because of this consciousness that he has suddenly, you could say that the subjectivity that was erased by Bissot is now coming back. Is now in each stroke here have to be thought about, have to be built slowly, one after the other. And okay, so let's say I have a detail of this painting just to show you. It's a little detail on the. It took me time to find where it was, but I simplify you the life. I put a little arrow. It's about on the right tops of the painting. Just a detail. But you see that then all these effect of the spatula makes that the painter have to be enormously conscious of what he's doing. He have to be in control. It's the same thing people used to say about Pollock. You say, oh, you throw painting on the canvas and all that. But if you make, for instance, an all-over pattern on a canvas, you have to be very conscious of what you do. Because otherwise, if you just throw painting like that, you will have a big spot here and you will have nothing there. And to have an all-over paint surface means that you cover more or less everything in the same way. And you create a kind of complete integrated surface with equal element. For that, you have to be conscious what you are doing. You have to be a subject. You have to be an interior, have an interior. And to finish my lecture with a beautiful and rare painting of Riopelle, it's a painting that is not in the Catalogue Raisonné, that have been discovered very recently, and it's called Self. And in fact, it's a self-portrait. Very, with a lot of, I would say, wound and very scratch and transform and torture in a way. But you see more or less a profile on the left side, and sometimes you can see a face even with two unclear eyes, as if from all this struggle that you see to get finally to himself, he finally made this extraordinary portrait. Who is tormented, who is not happy, but on the other hand, it is finally him in the painting. And we have very few self-portraits by Riopelle, very few. There's one more realistic and this one. So I think that concludes well what I wanted to present to you. So next time, because I hope you will come back. Today it was the weather was not good, but next time we will deal with this first inner space, the domestic space, the kind of more private space. Alors, thank you for your patience.